It's good to be here. It's good to stand in front of you today and have this fellowship time together and afterwards and before, and to have the worship time. If only y'all had a decent teacher. Sorry, I'm just going through my intro checklists. Let me see. Greeting, check. Self-deprecating humor, check. So my message has changed a little bit over the last few days. I feel like, I don't know, God was just sort of leading me in a different way than I originally had planned. And have you ever done a puzzle or started to put a puzzle together to where you have like a handful of pieces that are all sort of the same shade, and then like some of the lines start to come together and you get a section of it, right? And it's inside your frame and you got this section done. And then you realize, oh, here's some more pieces, and you put them together and you got a little spot. And you're like, that's making that whole picture right there. But then when you go to fit that in there, you realize you're missing a few pieces that allow you to connect it. You've got to go find those pieces. Well, that's kind of like where I've been. And I can tell by looking around, you guys aren't a big puzzle crowd. But you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. So I was working on a message, and then whenever I was trying to put the final piece together, I couldn't find these last few pieces. So what I did is I've taken the majority of what I've talked or studied, and that's what I'm bringing to you today. So I tried lining up the smaller section, the part that's like down in the corner. You're like, it matches, but it just didn't quite fit. So I'm still on the intro part of my message, by the way. I call this part managing expectations. Check. So the particular verse I want to start with today is Romans 2:23. All right, come on. And if you know anything about guns, you know that the 223 is this very popular and versatile round that is most commonly shot out of an AR-15. It's very high velocity, and it has a very pointy tip. And today, I'm pointing that tip towards you guys. And actually, see, in the military, there's I'm in the military, by the way, in case that phrase didn't give it away, but in the Air Force, there's something that they'll get you on, right? If they can't get you on anything else, it's called an Article 92. It's this catch-all, and it's failure to obey. That's what they call it, the failure to obey. Everybody knows Article 92, failure to obey. Yeah, they got me. I'm in trouble now. So Romans 2:23, since we're doing 223, guns. By the way, that is why I'm wearing this shirt. I was just going to let you guys get a look at this. Guns and Moses. All right? Guns and Moses. And I know I'm probably violating all sorts of rules by wearing a T-shirt and a jacket, but that's not even the worst of my crimes. I'm wearing a V-neck with another V-neck. I don't know if you caught that. So Article 92 and then Romans 2:23, in a way, it can be the Article 92 of the Scripture. So let's go ahead and read Romans 2:23. You who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the law. For it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Sometimes I feel like this verse is directed squarely at me or at people in our walk. Because when you can't get somebody on any one specific thing, you can look at how they treat others. And so, in some way, it was as if there was a portal through time that Paul opened up this window. And there's some things that I've seen. I think Paul may have opened this window and seen that people that are in our walk, Messianic, Torah pursuant, Hebrew roots, pronomian Christians, whatever label, the broader tint of people that understand that when Yeshua said, if you love me, keep my commands, he was talking about the Torah. These people, he's seen some things that these people are doing, and he penned these words, perhaps, right? I mean, Not really, but I'm just using it as a platform. So what am I talking about? There's some things I've seen online in some of the Torah-keeping communities online, where if you go there, you'll see knock-down, drag-out arguments almost every day about ridiculous stuff. Some of it's ridiculous, all right? They hash out every single week whether chickens are kosher. I'm tired of it. All right? Now, whether something is or isn't kosher is a very valuable conversation. But I'm more talking about the way that they approach the conversation that I find disheartening. So this guy, you probably know him. I think he was with Psalm 119 Ministries for a long time. His name is David Wilbur. He wrote a book called Fringianics. And I like David Wilbur a lot. I've never read this book, but I've heard him speak up on it several times and like the content of it. And even if you don't know what's in it, you realize that he's meshing two things together: Messianics and fringe lunatics. But just hearing the title, you sort of know the kind of person, or you've experienced the kind of person that he's talking about, I'm sure. And so the idea I want to look at today is what we might be doing, those of us who boast in the law, that may cause the name of God to be blasphemed, either from outside unbelievers or even inside among our own brothers and sisters. If I was titling this message, I guess that's what I'm doing right now, I would title it, Stop Sponsoring Blasphemy. So I do want to be especially clear about something. I'm not addressing anybody or anything that I've ever seen at Revive. Actually, I think we do a better job than anywhere I've ever seen or experienced, the best job actually at being in unity together. We definitely have things that we disagree about, and we could argue over them. We choose not to. Amen. All right, and if these topics are brought up, we discuss them like people seeking after righteousness together. All right, and a lot of this has to do, I think, with Jeremy and Ashley's insight and general direction that we have adopted to seek unity. We say it every single week. So if it's your first time here, at the end of the service, then we'll have we'll say, house divided cannot stand, and then the response from our congregation is seek unity. So in our initial verse, it says that the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. All right, so there's several things happening here. We're going to start digging in and unpacking what's going on, right? To start with, the name of God is taking damage. It's getting major flack, right? The ones that Paul are writing to, they are the one causing the damage, right? So, and the damage is going to the understanding that people have about the very nature of God. That nature of God is being blasphemed by the unbelievers. Yeah, I know it says Gentiles, but we know it's unbelievers because Paul is paraphrasing two different passages. I think they're so similar that whenever the historians look at these things, they're not sure if it's in Isaiah 52, or if it's in Ezekiel 36. And so, but these two things are very similar, and so they attribute this, Paul's paraphrasing, to these two verses. And when it says in those verses, it's the nations that are blaspheming because of what Israel is doing. And so I believe that this blasphemy has happened because these people have taken the name of the Lord their God in vain. So I'm not using the rest of the chapter here. I don't really have time to parse out every part of it. You should read it on your own. But these verses can stand alone without context because they are principles. You should read the context. I'm not taking anything out of context. Go back and read Romans chapter 2. The whole chapter is very convicting. So let's discuss the name of God first, right? So this has been a constant meditation of mine for several years now. And I was talking with Christopher Kennel before, and a lot of it really started to become my daily meditation after a Torah portion that he gave several years ago on Shemot. And then Darren, a few weeks ago, did a really great Torah portion. And in that Torah portion, Darren, you talked about the repeated uses of God saying, Ani Yahovah Elohechem, which is, I am the Lord your God. And Darren did an amazing job. Go re-watch that on YouTube. I really recommend it, because I think it was 34. Was it 34 times God says this just in this area here. And he is describing and bringing out and exposing his nature as he says these things. And then he also had this thing categorized into 3 different ways. It was very useful for me to relate to that, Darren, and I appreciate that teaching. Then at a certain point on Mount Sinai, right, God says to this group of people, I am putting my name on you. After he says that, he says, don't take my name in vain. Let's read that command. Exodus 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. I'm telling you now that this is precisely the reason that Paul wrote to them that they have caused God's name to be blasphemed. So what is taking God's name in vain? Or just look at and pull out some of the traditional interpretations of that. So what I was taught growing up, this meant that you shouldn't say God, this word, along with curse words. And that you shouldn't say things like, OMG. And I was even warned, don't even say gosh, right? Because gosh is just, a way that we figured out to go around. We're sidestepping breaking the commandment. So you should avoid that too. But this is taking his title, which is God, as his name. This is not the same thing in my opinion. And in my study, I don't see that really relates. Right? Did anyone else have the idea or was taught this maybe growing up, this traditional understanding that is very common? And it's also pretty easy to see that the interpretation, it leaves far too many unanswered questions to complete, right? Now, am I saying that you should curse or you can use these things? No. Definitely not. You should not talk filthy. You shouldn't curse. You shouldn't use inappropriate language, because actually that is taking God's name in vain. In the same way, possibly, that Paul is telling these people they're taking God's name in vain. So our Jewish brethren, they have a view that is kind of similar to mine, but it's also similar to the Christian and modern Christian interpretation. They say this means you shouldn't ever attempt to say the 4-letter name of God, what we know as the Tetragrammaton. The letters, Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. We just actually had those, the English representations of those letters on the screen during one of these previous songs. So my Israeli friend that I study with, whenever he can say the letters, but he changes the letters a little bit. He'll say Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. He'll like change that. He won't say Hey, but he'll say like Hey, Hey, or something like this, right? And he'll put an and in between them so they aren't accidentally, set together. And whenever I'm with him and we study together, I avoid that as well. I don't want to harm his sensibilities, even though I don't necessarily agree with his interpretation. I'll talk about that. I see something a little different. The Orthodox would never put it on a T-shirt. They wouldn't put it on a mug. They wouldn't write it on any paper that's unholy or that's not going to be kept holy, because they have such respect for this name. Even as it's written in the Bible and they come to that, they'll say Adonai, which means my king, or they'll say Hashem. That's what me and my Israeli friend use when we study. We say Hashem, which means the name. So I know that we've definitely covered the interpretation of this command, not taking the name in vain. We've covered it recently. Miguel did a really good message about it. It's been several months now. When I study this command, I don't see literal verbal or momentary usage of God's name. I don't see an abolition against using the name by God's people. They use his name many times, no recourse. Right? So when you examine the command, one thing you see is that the word that they have for take, it's not the word I would expect. Whenever I study Hebrew, the word for take, I see it as wacha, right? It means to sort of grab up and use this thing, to take it, right? They use a word. The word there, it's the word nasa, right? And then it's a version of that word, actually. The first letter is switched out for a tav. It's tisa. And this word is a little bit more metaphorical, you could say. It means to more or less bear up, to exalt, to esteem, to carry. And so it's more of a continual representation other than just a momentary taking and using. And so it lends itself to my interpretation, which is how we represent God to the world. So how can we say that the recipients of Paul's letter were taking God's name in vain? So there's kind of a simple test. I think it's simple. I don't know. I've sort of advised this. This is my idea of it. But there's a simple test to check and see if you're taking his name in vain. And one, do you claim to follow God? Or do others see you as a follower of God? And then, two, do your actions represent God's nature? Are your actions godly? Now, if they have represented something that is contrary to God's nature while claiming to follow God, then they have taken his name in vain, which is a major cause of blasphemy among the unbelievers, as we talked about. And that's what Paul's saying, is because of you, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles. And when he's using Gentiles here, he's referring to unbelievers. So we have a really good example of this in King David, actually. Because King David, somebody who showed us both sides of this command. On one side, he was very righteous, and he protected God's name, and he encouraged us all to do that. And this is his actual prayer. He says, Lord, lead me in the paths of righteousness for your name's sake. So, I like to exegete. That means pull the interpretations out of those words. I exegete it like this. You've invested in me. People see us as being related, connected. If I go after wickedness, I am taking you there with me, and it's going to damage your name. So, let me stay on the side of righteousness and let people glorify your name because of the righteousness I am exhibiting. So, now does David ever stray away from righteousness and hurt God's name? He does. He does it very badly at one time. I'm going to be in 2 Samuel 12, if you want to turn there, and just kind of briefly. But it's good to see these words yourself, I think. So the prophet Nathan comes to David, and he tells him the story about the guy who had the one lamb, and he's basically telling the story of what David has done to Uriah with Bathsheba. And Nathan finishes the story, and then David says unto Nathan, so this is 2 Samuel 12, verse 13. David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, the Lord also hath put away thy sin. thou shalt not die. Howbeit, because of this deed, thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. The child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. Wow. David caused God's name to be blasphemed among his enemies. He left the path of righteousness, and he damaged God's name. So, in what way? Like, just imagine what these people, these enemies of God, might have been saying about God, using what David did as their ammunition. Well, this kingdom is led by a man who violates the very principles that his God supposedly stands for. Even me, a wicked king of wherever, Canaan, Syria, wherever, even I know you don't kill your best friend, your largest and most loyal supporter, and then take his wife and commit adultery. I think it was for this very reason that the punishment had to fall on David, right? And this is my eisegesis, right? I'm going to read something into this, but I think in a way, possibly his son had to die, more than just a life for the life, but so that the mockers would not be able to make the claim his God tolerates injustice. A living reminder of something the enemy could hold up and say, look what that God tolerates. And if you read the end of the command, if you go back and you think about the command, it says, I will not hold him guiltless that takes my name in vain. And it makes sense. And in David's case, the death of his son, I think it's more than just a life for a life, but also, in some sense, God is clearing his name. So the world, they have a word for this. Those people that take God's name in vain. Anybody want to guess what the word is? It's hypocrite. And it's the word that they use as an excuse for why they keep God away. I can't go to the church. It's just a bunch of hypocrites. It's why they've left religion. It's why they don't pray. It's why they have no interest in religion. Because those people don't do what their God says. Because somebody that they know has taken God's name and drug it into the muckety-muck and damaged their perception of who God is in his very nature. So when it comes to these online forums, I'm not talking about the ones I mentioned earlier, the Torah-keeping ones, right? I'm talking about the, I don't know, wherever, the comment section in YouTube, whatever. I don't go into the fray with those any longer. Right? Because I used to have had zero success at winning souls there. Right? There was a time I would mix it up and I'd be like, oh, I can change this person's mind. I can make them see, how loving God is. And you know what they like to bring up? These people that are in there blaspheming God, they come pretty educated. All right? You know what they like to bring up whenever I talk about my God? They say, well, Constantine, the guy that shaped modern Christianity, right, and established the Roman Catholic Church, he had millions of people slaughtered during the Crusades, forced conversions, all sorts of tyrannical atrocities. He did it all underneath the banner of the cross. And then I said, well, that was a long time ago. I don't like Constantine. I don't like what he did. Oh, well. They bring up, well, what about all these Catholic priests up and down the northeast coast? Pedophiles that have damaged tens of thousands of little boys in recent decades. They follow your God too, don't they? to try making a case for Christ to people informed and full of atheistic doctrine, talking points, and spite. It's hard. It's practically impossible. Why is that? It's because in time, people have taken the name of God and committed absolute abominations and have damaged it. And in the same way, Nathan is telling David, this deed has given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. And they're using that same technique against us now. So we spent some time talking about taking the name in vain. This is a major cause of unbelievers to blaspheme our God. What is this blasphemy? What does this mean? What are they committing? All right, so I looked up and I brought some dictionary definitions with me. Here's Merriam-Webster. It says this, and there's two versions. There's the intransitive and the transitive verb. So blaspheme is to speak in a way that shows irreverence for God or something sacred. The transitive version says, to speak of or address with irreverence. And then here's the dictionary.com. Impious utterance or action concerning God or sacred things. Now, in my opinion, these are clear as mud. I don't like these definitions at all. I think they're very unhelpful, especially if you look at the way the term blaspheme, blasphemy, blasphemeth is used in the Bible. I don't think this really gets to the root of what it is. It's not even close, in my opinion. When you look at in the Bible how it's used, it's with words like scorn, despiseth, reproacheth, revileth, rebellion. So to me, irreverent, which is like the common theme between all these things, it just doesn't cut it. And after all, we have some recorded conversations between God and prophets and Moses, right? Think back to Numbers 11. Think back there. Like, Moses is talking to God, and he says, did I give birth to all these people? This load is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, kill me. If this is what you are going to do, kill me now, please. Look at that. Moses said these words to God. And I'm not saying that it's okay to be irreverent, but I'm saying he hears an impassioned cry of your heart. All right? Sometimes your heart just doesn't feel reverent. I'm not saying be irreverent. Okay. So where do we see blasphemy being used? All right, there's 3 different words for blasphemy, at least 3. The more focused one is this word gadaf. And it's used only 7 times in the Bible. That's interesting. But 6 of these 7 times, Strong's has it listed as blasphemy. The first time it gets used is in Numbers 15:30. And I've taught on this before, right? But here, I'll read it. But the soul that doth aught with the high hand, whether he be of a homeborn or a stranger, that same blasphemeth the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from among his people. Because he hath despised the word of the Lord, and he hath broken his commandment, that soul shall be utterly cut off, his iniquity shall be on him. And I'll just point out that, I said Gadolf is used 6 of 7 times as blasphemy. This is the one time it's actually not listed as blasphemy in Strong's. It is in this translation because I use JPS. But the word in the KJV would be reproacheth. So one thing that it shows us is that blasphemy is tied to rebellion. And actually, I think there's 3 things that you sort of know about rebellion. One is that God has very little tolerance for rebellion. That's why he tells us, rebel is utterly cut off. And, even a rebellious son, right, the parents are told, stone him, stone the rebellious son. And then, second, it stems from the deepest heart problem. And then third, it seems that it controls your speech and you hear rebellion whenever people talk. Because whenever Yeshua is talking about blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, right, and he's rightly accusing the Pharisees of committing this. He says this in Matthew 12:34. He says, "You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." There's another character in the scriptures that you can go look at to see what blasphemy is. It's the anti-Messiah, or Antichrist. In Revelation 13, verse 5, it says this, "The beast was given a mouth uttering great boast and blasphemies." Verse 6 of that same chapter, "He opened his mouth with blasphemies against God to slander his name and his tabernacle, that is, those dwelling in heaven." You see the same thing in Daniel. There's a lot of overlap between Daniel and Revelation. A lot of times they're talking about the same thing. So in Revelation it says the beast was doing boasts and blasphemies. Daniel, it says, 7:25, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws." 11, Daniel 11, you see sort of the same thing. "The king shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself, magnify himself above every god, speak marvelous things against the God of gods." So you see a lot of the blasphemy falling into categories. And to me, I find it helpful to categorize things. So one category I would say is like claiming to be God. I think that's what the Antichrist does. And that's actually what they accused Yeshua of. That's what they said his blasphemy was. In John 10:32, Yeshua answered them, "Many good works have I showed thee from my Father. For which of these do you stone me for?" And the Jews answered and said, "For a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, because thou, being a man, makest thyself God." So, one, claiming to be God. And then two, another category, slandering God, saying that God, that he is something he isn't, or, so the inverse, reverse of that, saying that he isn't something he is. So this is telling lies about his nature, right? And this is the predominant type of blasphemy that you see among, unbelievers, of course, but also, I think, among believers, when we represent his nature and we do it improperly. So let's do this. Let's look at more ways that this can happen, right? We talked about David earlier, right? He, through his adultery and through the murder, he gave God's enemies cause to blaspheme him, right? There's a more subtle version of taking God's name in vain. It's acceptance of wickedness through proximity. I just want to tell you a personal story. Even the things that we allow near us can cause us to misrepresent who God is. So I took my daughter to gymnastics. And there were some students there that were obviously male. They were wearing obviously female gymnastic outfits. And I had already paid for a month, but we never went back. Because exposing my kids to clear example of a perversion of God's image and allowing it to softly influence their perceptions about what is acceptable wasn't good for me. I couldn't do it. And so we had to walk away from that. Especially as impressionable as kids are, right? Just being near it in this behavior, I have in some way accepted it as normal in my child's eyes. So I wouldn't take my children near lewdness or cursing or, violence or filth on a normal routine. And I wasn't going to do that either. And if something happens at my home that I don't want my children to accept, I have to address it. Because if I don't, it's softly accepted. So I think this shows a principle from Matthew. This principle is shown in Matthew 21:12. It says this: "Then Yeshua entered the temple He drove out all those selling and buying in the temple. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those selling doves. He couldn't allow it to take place in his presence. To see what they were doing there and to not say something wasn't an option. He wasn't going to accept it. His father's name and who his father was being challenged by who was near in the temple. So had Yeshua walked by the money changers without saying anything, then these things would have been seen by his disciples, who at this point were almost like children. They'd been like, wow, Yeshua had no problem with it. But he didn't. He addressed it. So as he addressed it, what Yeshua said was a direct quote from Jeremiah 7. It's Jeremiah 7:11. But put this quote in context real quick, and I'll start in Jeremiah 7, verse 9. So it says this. This is Jeremiah speaking, or God speaking to the people through Jeremiah. He says, will you steal, murder, and commit adultery and perjury, offer incense to Baal, walk after other gods whom you've not known, and then come and stand before me in this house that bears my name, saying, ye are saved, so that you may keep doing your abominations. So God's calling them out for misrepresenting his nature. Stealing, murder, adultery, lying, idols. And standing before him in the house that bears his name and saying, you've saved us to keep doing this. In some way, God, you've endorsed it. That's what he is accusing him of. He's accusing them, right? Not just accusing, he's proclaiming that they have done this. So, proximity, it's an issue. And if God allows it, it does appear that he has endorsed it. And then it becomes a part of his name. And I believe that is the same reason Yeshua drove out the money changers. They were too close to a holy God. Jeremiah 7:10 says, you stand before me in a house that bears my name. Now, here's the verse that he was quoting as he's overturning these tables. Has this house, this is verse 11 by the way, has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers in your eyes? Look, even I have seen it. It is a declaration of Adonai. God asked the question. The structure, the very structure where I put my name on top of. It's almost like a rhetorical question. Has it become a den of robbers in your eyes? He knows that's how, maybe that's not how they viewed it, but that's what they've made it. There's an interesting connection between this passage and Psalm 69:10 and 11. So the story of Yeshua flipping the tables in the temple, it's in 3 of the Gospels. As Yeshua is rampaging against these merchants and money changers, he quotes Jeremiah 7:11. But in John, where the story is covered, in John 2, the account of driving out these merchants, the disciples remember Psalm 69:9, which says, the zeal for your house has consumed me. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to start in verse 8 on Psalm 69:8. I have become a stranger to my brothers and a foreigner to my mother's children, because the zeal of your house has eaten me up, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. So taking the name in vain happens because a person is associated with God. Because of that association, what they do reflects onto the Father. All right? Well, what David is describing here is sort of like the reverse case of that. Instead of him taking the name and being associated with God, he has become close to God and associated himself with God. And he finds in this state, in this seeking God state, always at the temple, that he has no friend in wickedness anymore. He becomes at odds with wickedness. So therefore, Those that would reproach God because of his righteousness are reproaching David because of his righteousness, because he has taken on the nature of God and godliness. So Yeshua talks about this, and he puts it this way in Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. For his name's sake. Jeremiah 7, that example, it's the opposite of that. God says that they were doing all of this wickedness, then bringing it into the house that bears his name, making it a den of thieves. All right, the reproach of the world is what they are now bringing onto God. Back in Jeremiah, God tells the people there, look back at history. This has happened before. See what happened to those people. So we've read through Jeremiah 7:11, 7:12. He says, indeed, go to my place that was in Shiloh, where I first made my name dwell, and now see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. While you were doing all these things, declares Adonai, I spoke to you early and often, but you did not listen. And I called you, but you did not answer. Therefore, I will go to the house that bears my name, the one in which you trust, the one that I gave to you and to your fathers, and I will do to it as I've done to Shiloh. What did he do to the house that bore his name, the one in Shiloh? He continues, I will cast you out of my sight, just as I cast out all your brothers, all the offspring of Ephraim. As for you, he's talking to Jeremiah now. Do not pray for these people. Do not suffer or do not offer any supplication or petition for them, nor entreat me, because I will not hear you. He doesn't hold them guiltless who take his name in vain. So this is the story, like the example that Yeshua is referencing here as he turns over the tables, as he casts off the merchant. It's an illustration of the time where God couldn't stand for the wickedness to be near him. It was rubbing off onto his name, and he expelled them. So Yeshua didn't silently accept that God's house which was bearing his name, was becoming a den of thieves and a crooked marketplace. He took care of business. So I know this whole message is sort of taking a little different turn than what I started out with, right? But like I said, it's the Article 92. It's the catch-all of how you can address something that is not of God's nature. Romans 2:23 seems to have been written and applicable to the time and a nature that I see in the broader community, not Revive. And unfortunately, some places, in these places, like they've termed it Torah terrorism. It's ingrained itself into the culture. You know, and I wonder if this is just like some sort of a byproduct of the divisiveness and like the broader American culture. I don't know. But I know that if you have exposure to the online forums, or if you've been to certain different fellowships, then you know what I'm talking about. Maybe it's just that I'm just now waking up to this, but to me, it seems like it's increased. So I think unless we guard against it, unless we make a purpose stand against it, it will come here and it can become a part of our culture. We don't want that. And I'll tell you, whenever I first started studying the Torah and I became seeking after righteousness, I guess you could say, that I was a little bit like that. I got a little knowledge. I got a little puffed up. I was looking for places to jump in and correct people's theology. Fortunately, God got my attention on that and showed me just how counterproductive that mindset is. It's like Constantine doing a crusade for Christ and killing everybody in your way. So if we want to minister for God's kingdom to individuals They have hearts and they have minds. You have to do it through love. So if you're smashing your brother in the head with all your Torah knowledge, is he going to listen to you? Or is he going to retreat and resent the instrument that you're hitting him with? I know people need rebuking from time to time. I feel like a lot of the time, some of these Torah scholars are looking for an opportunity to jump in and rebuke a little early, when instead, you should find it as an opportunity to show love. So in some way, I began this teaching of Romans 2:23. I'll just say this. Romans 2:23. 2:23. It's the bullet, the catch-all that I sort of unnecessarily pointed at everybody today. But I want to end with Matthew 5, 5, and 6. I don't know if you picked up on, sort of inside joke, I guess, between gun people. Right? The 5, 5, 6 is just the NATO version of the 2, 2, 3. And I didn't pick it because of that. It's just a coincidence. But whenever I see this unity of believers that believe like us, I ask, God, what can I do to help a community and teach to bring about unity? Not unity to the point where anything goes, but unity built on knowing that the believer to your left, right, front of you, back of you, is seeking after righteousness and has a heart for God like you do. All right? So I felt drawn to these two verses, and the idea of applying them together at the same time is the proper and godly way to apply them. So Matthew 5, 5 and 6, Yeshua says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." I've sought to understand this word meek for a long time. I'm not going to get into that fully, but meek, from the dictionary version, it doesn't really cut it for me. Then a while back, I heard a lecture from Dr. Jordan Peterson on Matthew 5, on the Sermon on the Mount. And his research in meek led him to describe it like this. Because normally, if you look it up in the dictionary, meek basically means weak. Meek means weak. But this example, this definition, the truer definition, I think, is this. Someone that has great strength, not weak, great strength, but applies it with gentleness and with humility. And so, why is verse 6 a part of the antidote? I think that we must seek righteousness with humility. You can't approach kingdom work with pride. No, sir. So as we sharpen each other, we need to do it in humility, but most importantly, we need to do it with love. Remember what our rabbi, Yeshua, the Rabbi Gadol, he says this in John 13:35, and I'll end with this. "By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another." Thank you. Shabbat shalom.